The street Jesus walked was not a grand road. It was a narrow, winding path in Jerusalem called the Via Dolorosa, which means the Way of Sorrows. This ancient street was made of uneven stones, worn smooth by countless feet over many years. The stones were hard and unforgiving, with sharp edges and deep cracks between them. Dust and dirt filled the air, kicked up by the shuffling feet of the crowd and the heavy sandals of the Roman soldiers. The sun was hot that day, beating down on the city and making the journey even more difficult. Every step on this path was a struggle, a painful reminder of the long walk ahead. The buildings on either side of the street leaned in closely, almost as if they were watching the sad procession. Their stone walls were old and stained, and small windows looked out like tired eyes. From these windows, people peered down, their faces a mixture of curiosity, fear, and pity. The narrowness of the street made the crowd feel even larger and more overwhelming. There was no room to escape, no quiet corner to find a moment of peace. Jesus was trapped in the middle of this river of humanity, pushed and pulled by the moving mass of people who had come to see him suffer. The sounds of the city mixed with the shouts and cries of the crowd, creating a loud and confusing noise. As Jesus moved forward, his body was already weak from the terrible beatings he had endured. His back was torn and bleeding from the scourging, and a crown of sharp thorns had been pushed onto his head. Each thorn dug into his scalp, sending waves of pain through him with every movement. His vision was blurred by sweat and blood, making it hard to see the treacherous path before him. The soldiers had dressed him in a heavy purple robe to mock him as a king, but now that robe was soaked with his own blood. He was exhausted, dehydrated, and in immense pain, yet he was forced to carry the heavy wooden cross on his already wounded shoulders. The cross itself was a terrible burden. It was not a finely polished piece of wood, but a rough, heavy beam, full of splinters that dug into his raw skin. The weight was immense, pushing down on him with crushing force. With each step, the rough wood rubbed against his shoulders, making his wounds even worse. He had to balance this heavy load while walking on the uneven stones, his feet stumbling and his muscles screaming in protest. The journey had only just begun, but the physical demands were already more than any ordinary person could bear. The path of sorrows was designed to break not just the body, but also the spirit. The procession moved slowly, a spectacle of cruelty and despair. The crowd pressed in, a wall of jeering faces and pointing fingers. Jesus struggled to keep his footing, his legs trembling under the enormous strain. The sun beat down without mercy, and the air was thick with the smell of sweat and dust. He could hear the angry shouts of those who condemned him, their words like sharp stones thrown at his heart. He tried to focus, to place one foot in front of the other, but his body was failing him. The weight of the cross seemed to grow heavier with every step, a physical representation of the sins of the world that he carried upon himself. His breath came in short, painful gasps. Then it happened. His foot caught on a loose stone, a small imperfection in the road that became an insurmountable obstacle. His weakened legs could no longer support the immense load. He stumbled, his balance lost in an instant. For a moment he fought to stay upright, his muscles straining with a final desperate effort, but the weight was too much. The cross tilted, pulling him down with an unstoppable force. He fell forward, his body collapsing onto the hard, dirty stones of the street. The heavy wooden beam crashed down on top of him, pinning him to the ground in a moment of shocking finality. The sound of the wood hitting the stone echoed through the narrow street. The pain was immediate and overwhelming. The impact sent a jolt through his entire body, and the full weight of the cross pressed down on his back, forcing the air from his lungs. His face hit the dusty ground, the grit and grime scraping against his skin. His hands, already pierced by nails in the future he knew was coming, were scraped raw as he tried to break his fall. For a moment, all he could feel was a crushing agony, a darkness that threatened to swallow him whole. He lay there, pinned and breathless, under the very instrument of his death. It was a moment of profound human suffering, a demonstration of his complete vulnerability in the face of immense cruelty. In that moment of collapse, Jesus was utterly alone, surrounded by a sea of people yet isolated in his suffering. The fall was not just a physical event, it was a moment of deep humiliation. The so-called King of the Jews was now lying in the dirt, unable to even carry the tool of his own execution. The jeers of the crowd seemed to grow louder, their mockery more intense. He was exposed, broken, and helpless. Yet even in this state of complete degradation, a quiet determination remained. The weight on his back was not just wood, it was the weight of his mission, a burden he had chosen to accept for the sake of all humanity. The reaction of the soldiers was swift and brutal. They saw the fall not as a moment of human weakness, but as an inconvenient delay. Annoyed by the interruption, they moved in immediately. One guard kicked at Jesus' side, yelling at him to get up. Another yanked on the ropes that bound his wrists, adding to his pain and humiliation. Their faces were hard and impatient, showing no trace of compassion. To them, Jesus was just another criminal, another task to be completed. They were not interested in his suffering. They were interested in getting him to the place of execution as quickly as possible. Their cruelty was casual, a routine part of their job. The crowd, however, was not so united in its response. Many people in the throng reacted with glee and scorn. They pointed and laughed, seeing the fall as proof of his weakness. "He cannot even carry his own cross," they shouted. "Some king this is!" Their voices were filled with contempt, and they took pleasure in his suffering. For them, this was a spectacle, a form of entertainment. They had come to see a man broken, and his fall was a satisfying part of the show. Their hearts were hardened, and they joined the soldiers in mocking the fallen man, completely blind to the divine tragedy unfolding before their eyes. But not everyone was cruel. Scattered throughout the crowd were others whose hearts were breaking. His mother, Mary, watched from a distance, her face a mask of silent agony. Every wound he suffered was a wound to her own soul. John, the beloved disciple, stood near her, his expression one of deep sorrow and helplessness. There were also women from Galilee who had followed him, and they wept openly, their cries of grief mixing with the jeers of the others. These few souls felt his pain deeply. They saw not a criminal, but a man they loved, an innocent teacher being subjected to unimaginable cruelty. Their sympathy was a small, quiet light in a vast sea of darkness. These silent observers could do nothing to help. They were powerless against the Roman soldiers and the angry mob. All they could offer was their presence, their tears, and their prayers. Their sorrowful faces stood in stark contrast to the angry and mocking ones. The fall of Jesus divided the world in that moment, separating those who delighted in suffering from those who grieved for it. It revealed the true nature of the human heart, capable of both extreme cruelty and profound compassion. For those who loved him, watching him fall was a moment of unbearable pain, a memory that would be etched into their hearts forever. Lying on the ground with the crushing weight of the cross on his back and the shouts of the crowd in his ears, Jesus felt the full depth of human weakness. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. The pain was a fire that consumed him, and the dust filled his mouth and lungs. It would have been easy to give up, to let the darkness take him. It would have been understandable to stay down, to surrender to the exhaustion and despair. The physical and emotional burden was more than anyone should have to bear. He was completely spent, a broken man lying in the filth of the street, mocked by his enemies and pitied by his friends. But in that moment of utter brokenness, Jesus found a source of strength that was not of this world. He thought of his purpose, the reason he had come. He remembered the love of his Father and the mission he had to complete. This was not the end. This fall was part of the journey, a necessary step on the path to redemption. He drew on an inner well of divine strength, a quiet resolve that defied his physical condition. His spirit, though tested, was not broken. He knew he had to get up. He had to keep going, not for himself, but for all the people who would one day find hope in his sacrifice. With a great effort, he began to move. Slowly, painstakingly, he pushed against the ground with his scraped hands. His muscles trembled violently as he fought against the weight of the cross. The soldiers watched impatiently, ready to pull him up, but he was determined to rise on his own. He shifted the heavy beam, finding a new balance, and planted his feet firmly on the uneven stones. It was an act of pure will, a triumph of spirit over flesh. He pushed himself up from the ground, lifting the cross with him. He stood once more, swaying and unsteady but upright. The crowd grew quiet for a moment, surprised by this display of incredible strength. As he stood, covered in dust and blood, he took a deep, shuddering breath and began to walk again. His steps were slow and deliberate, each one a victory. He continued on the Via Dolorosa, his face set toward Golgotha, the place of the skull. This act of rising from the fall was a powerful symbol. It showed that even when we are crushed by the weight of our burdens, even when we fall into the dirt and are surrounded by mockery and despair, there is always the strength to rise again. Jesus' journey to the cross was a story of suffering, but it was also a story of incredible resilience, love, and the unwavering power of faith to overcome even the darkest of moments.